Welcome everybody. So you might have seen me before because this is the second workshop I have facilitated for your community of practice. The last one was with Shari Bowker from the University of Queensland, who's our learning designer in ePortfolios, and we looked at feedback, how to use feedback in ePortfolios. So that's available to you on your COP website with NAN. Okay, so a little bit of an idea of where we're going. So we have an hour and a half together. So we're right already into the welcome. We do actually have a plan, and we're asking you to do some work with us tonight or morning, whenever it is. And seeing we have some people who are unable to come because of the internet failure, we will be able to do a little bit more hands-on stuff, which will be great. We're going to look first at digital maturity. So when we're talking about digital ethics, we are expecting our students or even ourselves as teachers to be mature in our digital suite of tools. So that's an important topic to sort of start with and to understand what is involved in that, that process and also the suite of tools that are involved. We are going to do a breakout rooms section there on a little activity and summarize with a little bit of concept around eProfessionalism. What does it mean for us to be e-professionals? And then as last time, we'll have a short time then for you to ask questions. So have them ready in the chat. Nan and Christine and I'll both be looking around to see what questions you have there. So we'll have a short time then. And then we'll do another activity on Zoom. Now we're going to turn to thinking about what are the ethical challenges we have. So what type of challenges do we face online and do our students face when they start putting their ePortfolios online, or they're starting to embed social media, etc. So we'll think about that. And then we have some scenarios just to see whether, whether you're listening. No, that's not really true. It's to actually just give you some practice in thinking about some real life types of things that can happen and what are the problems and what solutions can we have for our students. And then again, we'll have a longer question time and just a bit of a wrap up, and we'll show you some resources that you can use. I've also sent to Nan a whole set of resources already that are open source, so you can get the links. I've given you the links, so you can just go and get them from those particular places, because Christine and I have done quite a bit of research in this area with some other colleagues, so there's quite a bit out there now to think about, especially for ePortfolios. Okay, so learning outcomes. So I've got 4, which is, I suppose, quite a lot, but it takes us through the process of the workshop. So at the end of the workshop, we're hoping that you'll be able to appreciate the value to students of using ePortfolios as a tool to develop their digital maturity. So this is the same for you as well when you're involved with other teachers, but for your students too. There is a whole process to developing digital maturity, and ePortfolios are really solid way of being able to do that over time. We would like you to be able to comprehend, so to understand and to articulate what are the key ethical issues in working and learning online. So it's good for us to have an understanding of all the different things that our students are going to face, because there is quite a number of issues that come with working digitally. And so we'd like you to be able to know what they are and to be able to talk about them. Then we'd like you to be able to assist your students to display their strengths and aspirations safely online. So that's when they're using their ePortfolios in our circumstances for your projects. That's when they'll be using ePortfolios, but obviously it's for other times when they're actually online as well. And we'd like you to feel confident to be a role model and support your students when they're trying to make decisions, good ethical decisions, when they come across something online and they're not quite sure what to do, that you'll be able to coach them and guide them through that so that they can learn next time to be able to make that decision themselves. Okay, so I think this is probably our assumption that we have expectations on students, and our aspiration for them would be to successfully engage online. So we're not just talking about here chatting with their friends, on social media, just casually every day, how they zip through that, or, posting up an image of themselves, or, what the latest social media things are. We actually want them to be engaged successfully. So we want them to understand how this genre works, how they need to behave, not just a set of rules, but to be able to think about what it means to be a digital citizen. So when you're a citizen, you have rights and responsibilities. So we want them to understand the whole suite of that so that they can be citizens online. And work that Christina and I have done is about how to help students. Obviously, when you've got younger age students like some of you do, you would be starting small. But we did have discussions, Christina and I, about how important it is to start young with the students, and then over time to them learn how to be mature digitally. So we have this maybe idea that you just go online and you just do whatever and you learn tech skills, but it's not like that really. If you want to be engaged and a citizen, you have to actually be mature in understanding what goes behind all those clicks, or that press of the button, or putting something out there. So that's this process that we're going to talk to you about. So what do we mean by digital maturity? Well, I just said it's a process. So, right from the baby who plays with the mother's phone in the stroller we see at the shops, through to the child that you've got in infants, where you're starting, they come with some knowledge of how to get around, say, an iPad or a phone, but you're going to be starting to teach them the other skills and knowledge that they need for part of this process. And then, of course, that accelerates when they become adolescents. So those of you who've got upper primary and high school, you're preparing them for adulthood. So a lot of decisions would be made there about what they use online and the skills that they have and the comprehension of what actually happens online. And, the data you might put out there never goes away or something like that. They might just think it's okay and it disappears sometime, but we know that there is such a thing as digital garbage. So we do have to be careful about what we're putting online and how we're displaying ourselves. So this is where you and we come in, is providing guidance and support to help them mature. And we're going to do a little bit of an exercise later about how to use curriculum to actually help that maturity process. We're going to ask you to design a few activities that might help using an ePortfolio to hasten that process for different age groups, depending on what age you have. And we're going to suggest strongly that ePortfolios definitely facilitate this process. Now, this was my little crash of ideas about what does ePortfolios enable students to do online? Well, first of all, we know that ePortfolios, you can create a repository of your artifacts. So we've got our own in our ePortfolios, and our students are collecting them all the time. And so they've got lots of personal things and maybe learning things, co-curricular items, all put in this one place. So yes, ePortfolio is a repository. If you're using an ePortfolio for assessment tasks, which you may be in your projects with your students, you will have a record of those assessment tasks in your ePortfolio as well. And I guess the key point about that is that those assessment tasks, as they stand, will only be seen by the educator or the teacher or whoever, a private audience who's actually evaluating those assessment tasks. So unless the student shares them somewhere else, they'll only ever be for that private audience. I think ePortfolios enable students to be digitally literate, so they've got to use skills to learn the system that you're giving them. So they have to have some comprehension of how things work digitally. They can develop an online profile. So these words, profile, branding, identity, are used in the research around digital presence, obviously digital ethics, and of course then it flows into portfolios, but it's not just for portfolios. So online profiling and branding comes into employability. So, you know, you want to show your strengths and your, you know, things that you can do in that branding. So that's something students have to think about. What do I want to look like online as a professional? What's my identity going to be? How's that going to be shaped? Obviously, ePortfolios, they can share information with others, and that can be a danger point as well as a positive. We'll talk a bit more about that they need to know what is appropriate sharing. Same with posting images, photos, and text in social media, another hot area. And they can embed links in their own portfolios. So again, you have to just be careful about that, to whether you're opening up your portfolio to some social media audiences. And you can interact with private or public audiences, and that's something else we need to think about. Who's going to look at this if I let it out to everybody? Do you want to talk about some of these, Christine? I'm putting you on the spot now, but you did work this out, so.
Thanks, Christine. Yes. So I think it's really helpful just to be very clear about some of the digital terms definitions that we're talking about, simply because if we're not clear about what we mean by the different terms, well, then our students aren't going to be clear either. So what we did is when we started looking in this area, Christine and I put together a number of terms that were being used and often used interchangeably. And we went through the literature to identify not only the definitions, but also the key elements of each of these terms. So you can see on this slide, we're talking about digital literacies or capabilities. And this is a term now being used quite a lot. And we've got some exercises for you to do around this. But these are really what we mean when we talk about digital literacies, the capabilities required to thrive. That is to be an effective and responsible participant in a digital society. So it's not only just about what you can do, but it's actually how you manage yourself and how you can manage your life. So of course, that's very important when you're thinking that children now are starting to engage in a digital society really from, you know, even before they can talk. So if we're not providing them with the tools through their education in order to understand what that means, they're really not going to be able to thrive, particularly as they progress through their education. So there are a number of six. So there are 6 elements to digital capabilities, and as I said, we'll go through these a little bit later. But then we've also got to differentiate our capabilities from the different digital systems and technologies, because of course this is all around hardware, software, what we actually use. So ePortfolios come into the digital systems that we might be engaging students with in order to develop their digital literacies and capabilities. So digital literacies and capabilities don't operate in a vacuum. They actually operate through systems. So it's important that we understand what the systems are and that we provide our students with the tools to use those systems. So do you want to go to the next slide, Christine?
Yes, I was just going to say there too, depending on if you don't have a commercial system, you have to be a little bit more aware of the ethical considerations if you use something that's just public. So that's something you might need to think about too when you're choosing a system.
Absolutely. And I think this is where digital ethics becomes really quite important, that we really have to think about what is the right thing to be doing when we're actually looking at the intersection of technology, innovation, and accepted social values. So we all have an ethical approach. We all have ethics according to the professions in which we work. But when we actually think about it from a digital perspective, it becomes a little bit blurred. And I think we have to actually think about it in respect to the digital systems, the digital environments in which we operate. So here we've used the ABLE digital ethics principles and ePortfolios statement, because this really does sort of bring together the importance of operating from an ethical perspective. So we actually have a responsibility from an institutional perspective, where we support and we promote awareness of digital ethics. Those who are creating ePortfolios, so again, this goes back to Christine's point, you may actually be using an open access version. We need to think about how we practice within that portfolio, the respect, the fact that we must consider other authors' rights and reuse permissions. And we'll be talking in a little bit more detail about that. Also thinking about the access to technology, privacy, and content storage are all really important aspects of digital ethics. And then again, when you think about the platform providers, they have to be thinking about the accessibility and consent for data usage. So there are quite a number of issues that we're going to be unpicking today as we go through our presentation. And then the other two areas are digital citizenship and footprint, and our digital brand. So Christine talked a little bit about branding earlier. So when we think about digital citizenship, it is really understanding, I think it's particularly important for students, particularly younger students, to understand the human, cultural, and societal issues related to technology, and that they learn to practice both legal and ethical behavior. And this really does need to start from an early age, because what we're seeing in higher education is students aren't always able to transfer their understanding, particularly of professional values and professional ethics, into a digital environment. So if we don't start early, by the time our students come to tertiary education, they are struggling to actually understand the differences and the nuances between operating in a practice environment, operating in a work-based environment, and then operating in a digital environment. So here we're actually supporting them with practicing online etiquette, developing their digital literacies, understanding ethics and related law in relation to the digital environment, and knowing how to stay safe online. But also, as Christine's already referred to, understanding the permanence of data, the fact that things never go away, and to be then able to consider what it is that they are actually posting, and what they are sharing from their work that they're doing. And finally, the digital brand is a strong personal brand that relies on an online presence. And this is really important to us as professionals as much as to our students. And it does communicate. So when we think about a brand, we're thinking, what do we stand for? What is important to us as professionals? And then we create this online presence that actually reflects our strengths, beliefs, and aspirations. And this is important when we start to think about how we create and maintain social media and networking sites. So things like LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, all of these things that we use to advertise really, some of the innovative work that we're doing. Also needs to be we need to be thinking about how we are communicating that. We might have a personal website, we participate in blogs, also using search engine optimization. And it's important that we actually have a consistency, maintaining one authentic brand, so that when we're actually going across these sites, our values and our persona are similar. So that's all from me, Christine.
Yes. So the final part of this is a paper, so that all that Christine just talked about is a paper that we wrote. So all those references you saw scattered through that table, you will find in the paper in the reference list, and Nan has got the link to where you'll find that. But the idea of this, all of those things, is that the students can't learn that all at once. Like, it is definitely a process. And what we were saying in the paper was that, you have to develop this into curriculum of some kind. So it may only be one strand of a curriculum you already have, but we set out to give an example over a 3-year curriculum. And part of it here is just 3 of the things Christine's talked about. So digital literacy, ethics, and citizenship, and how you might make learning activities in year 1 to introduce those subjects, and then in year 2 to actually advance the student skills. And then obviously for us in a 3-year program, for example, at university, by the 3rd year, we would want mature skills for the students. So it is something that just does, as I said before, doesn't just happen. I think it has to be planned for. So when you're working with your students, it might be, only say 1 or 2 things that you identify you want to, a couple of categories, but you will need to plan it across the curriculum. So perhaps with smaller children, it might be just the literacy skills of how to do things. You might be taking carriage of the ethics for them because you can't teach them that perhaps at such an early age. You're going to have to actually know that for yourself. And obviously, as they mature in high school and through to postgrad study, post-school studies, that we'd want them to be these citizens that Christine was talking about.
And I think also that we can also think about how these things can be integrated as part of a broader curriculum. So they don't have to stand alone, but you can integrate them with other activities. And while we actually have identified them as singular activities, we would be attaching these to the ePortfolio usage. So you might not necessarily be using ePortfolios within a school environment, but you could definitely be integrating a lot of these activities into your general curriculum. Particularly, I think around the digital citizenship is something that does sit very well when you're talking about cyberbullying, getting children to understand how to be kind and respectful to others, not only in person, but also online. So again, you can be quite creative in how you can integrate a number of these activities.
Yeah. Okay, so in one of those categories, there was the 6 elements of digital capabilities that Christine mentioned. And this is a fairly well-known diagram from JISC, which is in the UK, that had a project to develop these. So if you think of 6 elements of digital capabilities, you could actually say digital literacies or competencies, but they've chosen the word capabilities. And I think that's partly because it fits a wider scope in the fact that, as they said, it's for all of your life, living, working, and learning. So if you look at it carefully, and you're going to be doing something with one of these in a minute. So this is the link to the project you can read later. But this idea that in the middle, we have ICT proficiency. So there used to be a time not that long ago that if you could use a computer and, maybe a phone, you were ICT proficient. And that's fine because we do need those skills. But you can see here, this is only a small part of the actual model. And good on you, Michael, for taking a photo, because that's what I was going to suggest for people when they go to their breakout rooms, that they can have a photo of this. So you're way ahead of me. So you can see out of that comes petals, as such, we could say, that overlap and join into that. So now we're expanding what we're asking our students to do. We're asking them, for example, to be creative, problem solvers, innovative, to be able to communicate with other people, collaborate and participate, to continue learning. So, the digital space moves on very quickly, and they're going to have to learn and keep learning what's the latest thing and how to use it for their own professional life or as active citizens. And then there's information data and media literacy. So there's a big conglomerate there of skills and attributes and knowledge for the student. But then I think the nice part about this model is the fact that outside of all of that, surrounding it all, is this idea of digital identity and well-being. So that touches on being confident in our identity online. So the students develop this confidence. They know how the rules of engagement, so to speak, so they can confidently navigate their way around things on that online, and they know what to do to have well-being. So like the cyberbullying and all those things that can happen, they know what's the right thing to do about that. They are enjoying being in that space and are safe and feel protected in that. And I think that's for everyone, really, that the confidence and the well-being is a very important part. Right, so they're the 6 again. Now, what we're going to do, we have about 30 people, so we could maybe have 6 breakout rooms for 5 people. And what I want you to do when you get into your group is to choose one of these 6. So if you've got your camera, you could take a picture of this, or you could even just look through the list now and try and advocate for the one that you want. So you might just want to talk about ICT proficiency. That might be where your students are at. Or you might want to develop them in creative work, or how to work in groups. You might want them to know how to understand data better. Or maybe you want to look at the well-being. So there's lots of topics, but you're going to have to negotiate that in your group. Because what I would like you to be able to do is then decide that and then develop an activity, or maybe more than one activity. We've only got probably about 10 minutes that you could use to help facilitate that capability in ePortfolio curriculum. Okay, so you might have something you've got in mind already. So you'll have about 4 other people to work with. Pick something that you might want to use in an ePortfolio curriculum that will help your students progress in learning that capability. Now, is there any questions? You want to put it in the chat before we go off into the other space? We're all good? So, all right, Nan, I think we're right then.
Yes, I sent the model picture, so you can use that.
Oh, you're so good.
And then we're going to put everyone in breakout room.
Yes, please. And maybe Christine and I'll just float round from one group to the other.
I'm not a co-host, so Nan, you'll have to put me into a breakout room.
Okay, I'm in.
Yes.
I'm going to 3. I'll get you back. Right. Okay, I know we had a very lively discussion, and I'm afraid we don't have time to hear everything that people had said because we will run out of time. But it was interesting to hear the different elements and the different age groups everybody's got. So I hope that was an enriching time for you to be in that group and have some discussion. Now, I'll just share my screen again so we can keep moving. Right. There's plenty of more material around that model if you want to investigate it further. And there is some practical tips for you to how to stimulate different progress in those elements that we've been discussing. So I guess really in summary, what we're saying is that we want our students to be e-professionals. And there is a body of research around this idea of e-professionalism. And why we like it is because it actually talks about engagement online, but it includes not just netiquette. I don't know if you're old enough to remember that, but when computers first came out, there was rules about how you had to respect others online, and it was a very simple checklist. This is not just a checklist of how to behave in a meeting online. This includes your attitudes to things, your actions, the codes of conduct that you might have as a professional. It also includes your values. So these is what we've been talking about, I think is coined very well in this term, e-professionalism. And that's what we want for our students. The University of Edinburgh has some nice things to say to help you with your students in that, to give them some ideas of how to understand what that term means. And yet we know from practice, students still have difficulty applying effective ethical decision-making in all the different situations and contexts online. So they think they've got it, and then some new situation will come up, some new scenario, and they don't get it right. And so we have to have a good understanding of that and be able to talk to them about that and give them ideas of explain to them why something might not be right that they are doing. And Christine will tell you, she's on the ethics, the misconduct or whatever it is board, and hears all the stories as to why students think they've done the right thing, but they actually have just not understood often that it's hasn't been appropriate. And one of the reasons for that, and this is also from the research, is that the line between us personally online, so our persona for us is, you know, just in living, and our professional persona, so as an academic, for example, is increasingly blurred. So students, as we said, have their own private life where they're flipping around, talking to their friends, posting stuff, and then they're expected to be a professional, I don't know, nurse, doctor, teacher, whatever, and they don't understand there's different rules or different, you have to be different with that. And so now we're becoming confused about social media in particular and what they should be doing as a professional and what they shouldn't be doing. All right, we've got 5 minutes for questions now. Nan, if you want to monitor if there's anybody, we will have another time later.
The moment we don't have the question yet.
Good. All understood. All right, well, we can keep going. All right, another little test for you, another digital literacy test. You should be able to see the word annotate on your screen. On the mine, it's up there. Let's know if you can't see it. And if you press on it, you'll actually see this next toolbar that gives you lots of options to play on a white screen. So I'm going to give you a white slide and you can put text on it. You can pick the color of your text. So if you drop that down, there's a whole lot of different colors. You can give stamps, whether you like something, or little hearts and all sorts of things like that. If you put the wrong thing, you can rub it out. So it's a little practice on having using a skill in Zoom. And the question's going to be, what do you think is the most important ethical challenge for people online? Okay, so you're going to go, when you've thought of your answer, and you can put more than one, you're going to go to annotate, drop down. I'm going to pick text. Oh, actually, I think I've got green text. And I'm going to click on here and I'm going to write.
Christine, do you need to come out of slideshow for everybody to see the annotate button?
Do I?
I don't know. Can everyone see the annotate button? I can't. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's there in the view option.
Oh, might be in a different option.
Yes, we have different options.
Okay.
But you have to, you can click the view option on top. Besides
Yeah, go to options.
Screen. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Does that help, Christine? Okay, so go to options and then tick annotate. And then
the icons will be popping out.
Yeah, here's somebody. Yeah. See, another tricky bit, everyone has different versions.
Yeah.
Okay, so so you just click on that where you were, Ray. Come back and click, and then you can type it in. How are you going? I've got the thing over your questions. That's probably the problem. You can't see the question. Oh, someone's, I have to rub that out now. Hey, rubber. So what is the key, most important challenge, that ethical challenge online? The copy-paste behavior of students? Yes. Plagiarism. That's definitely one we know about. Confidentiality. What else do you think might happen to get problems for students? Well, I know Christine mentioned a couple before.
Hi, Christine. Someone said that they cannot annotate.
Okay. Do they want to put it in the chat? We can put it, you can put it on for them. Or I can put it on. Or maybe they can just tell us, just turn on their mic and tell us. Okay, so we've got sharing without checking. Take the answers from Google. Oh, yes. I'll put it up for you. Okay, so we've got quite a bit here about plagiarism and that, but let's think of some other things that might happen. So Christine mentioned before about safety. So perhaps cyberbullying or trolling students, someone said that, saying things that aren't very nice to other people, using other people's material. Data privacy. Yeah, where, I mean, if you pick an ePortfolio system, where is the data going to be stored? Does the student own the ePortfolio? What about not knowing how to tick the privacy buttons? So they think they've got it all private and it's all open to everybody.
There's another few things in the chat about privacy issues versus the student-teacher relationship. And that can be on social media, that can be an issue. And also there's another thing about one student doing the task and the others copying from it. So people not everybody's contributing to the task. I do like the idea about the reference sources, the no references, and the problems with actually, and that goes into whether or not people are going to the right reference sources. And those all seem to be issues that everyone experiences.
Sharing without checking, that's a good one.
Sorry, my heart is going. We've
overlapped each other, but
I'm afraid I'm going to have to take my heart off.
Rub it out. Sharing of information with others' consent, I think. Yeah.
Yes, and Cherry also shared that parents are leaking the information to other parents.
Oh.
Oh, really?
Online activity and posting in social media.
Oh.
We
I haven't heard of that
one
before.
No, we hadn't thought about the issue with the parents. Yeah, that's a really important thing. And maybe it is also about not only
Yes.
supporting students with digital citizenship, but also supporting the parents. Because although we might be educating our students, obviously, if our parents aren't role modeling that good behavior as well, it's going to be an issue.
Yes. So for those of you that I met have young adults, that would be their peers, of course, too. There's a lot of peer pressure on students if we go to academic integrity and cheating. Yeah, bullying. Okay, I think you're getting the idea of it. We don't have to labour it, but it can be quite fun because using the annotate button, and you can use a whiteboard as well with your students and get them to put things on it. All right, now I can save that. So let me save it. Okay, and then I'm going to close it. Thanks, everybody. Right. Oh, I've got it still on there. Hang on, because it goes on to every slide. Clear all drawings. Right. Okay. That's better. Okay, so we're all friendly to each other when we make mistakes online now, aren't we? We need to share that with our students. Okay, this was the brainstorm we had, and we will talk about some of them, and you did talk about some as well. So one of the ethical issues, which is even before you get to the actual online, is making sure that all your students have access to technology. So they may only have access to something when they're in class, and when they are at home, they may not. So you just need to think about that, because there's no point setting an assessment task or something online and some students can't even do it. And in some parts of the world, that's actually more serious than others. But we need to be equitable. We have talked about safety and cybersecurity, so just being careful, and equity and inclusion. So inclusion for all different people, those with learning difficulty, disability. How are we going to make our learning activities in the ePortfolio inclusive? Data protection, where is that data sitting? Who's going to be able to see it? Particularly important if you use an open source or a public type of software. Just make sure, that the student still has control over that data. So that leads to ownership. Okay, so the students doing a lot of work in their ePortfolio, and then they move on to the next school, or they graduate to university, and then after, are they going to be able to take this work with them, or do they have to start again? So that's something else to consider. Privacy, obviously, that goes with a lot of the things we've just said, to protect the privacy of themselves, and also in some of the work we did, children they worked with, vulnerable clients, etc. There needs to be privacy and confidentiality. So if you're going to represent other people, you need to be very careful about that and have their permission to do so. But it can also mean copyrights, the sharing rights that you have as well. So secondary use of information. You just can't necessarily take someone else's information and then start using it on your digital portfolio, the same as you would be plagiarizing if you was handing in an assignment. I think if we're going to ask our students to do these types of things, it is an ethical obligation to give them support. So it's not that great to say, oh, we're going to do this now and off you go and learn how to do it. So we need to think about the workloads for ourselves and for the students, and how we can actually give them support in doing these activities. And then the last one, which I actually learned about more recently, is in ePortfolios, we're encouraging our students or even our peers to give their own narrative, to be an identity of their own. So if we're judging that as an assessment task, we need to be careful that we're not biased by our own assumptions of what it should look like, because they might be very different. Each one might be very different. So your rubric needs to be able to manage that difference. So the way you write that rubric and the way you judge it needs to be on certain conceptual criteria, or certain criteria that's very general and doesn't relate to, say, cultural gender or whatever, or just, you know, different experience backgrounds that people have. Okay, now just keep that list in your mind, because now it's your turn to have a little go at some of the scenarios that we've developed for you. Oh, just before we do that, I know everyone brought this up, and maybe this is another workshop, Nan, because we can speak quite a lot to academic integrity. But this is an important part, as you just shown in the annotate exercise, that cheating is an important, well, it's something to address, and we don't want to let it go. And we also want to inspire our students to academic integrity, which is basically commitment to values. And this is the most commonly used in our country's definition of that. So honesty, trust, fairness, respect, responsibility, and courage. And so we have that aspirational side that we're trying to have our students commit to, so that they will have professional integrity, personal integrity, and of course academic integrity in their studies. We need, it doesn't sound like it's what something is happening here, but teachers can underestimate or reject the fact that they don't like to think cheating's happening in their class, but we can tell you that it's a frequent occurrence. Deprioritizing academic integrity has long-term implications for primary and secondary students as they transition to tertiary education. So, for example, Australian universities and a lot of the Western countries that I know of have very strict academic integrity standards for students, and there's very harsh punishments for students who, although they try to be educative, the punishment for committing some of the offences can be quite severe, and it can jeopardise their academic progression. So it can be hard if the students aren't picked up in the earlier days, and we have this with our own primary and secondary students too, and they're allowed to cheat, or they're not told what is the right thing to do academically. It's very hard for them when they come to tertiary education. It's just overwhelming, the different expectations of them, and trying to transition just becomes too much. So good on you for actually putting that a lot in the annotate exercise, and that's definitely something that we could talk to if you wanted to do that later in the year. Okay, now I've given you a bit more time to digest the list. Okay, Christine.
Thanks, Christine. Okie doke, everyone. So we've got a number of scenarios coming up. So what we want you, so I'll introduce the scenarios and go through them with you. And this is going to sort of take us sort of towards the end of our morning together. And then what I want you to do is within the chat to identify the key challenges from each of the scenarios, identify the solution, and if there could potentially be a better solution. So these are all different scenarios that have happened and that we've sort of taken from different environments around the globe. But they're not the only solution. So what do you, so have a think about what could be potentially a better solution to each of these scenarios. So, okay, so our first one, yeah. Okay, so here we have, you are an educator and you're finalising your ePortfolio platform choice. So you're aware that several students in your class have disabilities that impact their learning. So in this role, you collaborate with any units that work with these students with disabilities to involve them in testing potential platforms. So as part of the vetting process, you check the platform's website or test drive the software to see what accessibility accommodations they have created. And you then compare these features with the needs of your students. So the first question is, what are the key challenges in this scenario?
So think ethical challenges. Someone in the chat or someone wants to say what they think it is?
No, I'm sorry. I'm just finishing a different chat about cyberbullying.
Oh, sorry. No,
In the
I was
chat,
just
yeah.
encouraging anyone to put it in the chat or speak it out even.
So I guess the digital issue here is about accessibility. So students who can't always, who don't always have the same learning, you know, who have a different way of learning.
Yeah. So inclusiveness too, like they're being inclusive and equitable, all the same kind of language, isn't it, around making sure all your students can use the platform. Okay, so solution.
So one of the key challenges here are about the number of disabilities you might have in a class. I think
Yes.
Josephine has said quite rightly.
Let me get back to the chat.
Yeah. So that's a key area. Yeah. So what might be some of the solutions to that, particularly if you've got a range of disabilities in the class?
Yeah.
Or a range of ability even, you know, different ways of learning. All right, so if it doesn't fit with the learners that you've got, you find another platform. That's a very good solution.
So even before you maybe have that platform and you're looking for one, this is a key item you need to be looking at. So if you're still picking your ePortfolio platform for whatever work you're doing, think about this fact that you have the students with disabilities or different ways of learning, and find out what that platform or software has to offer. Even if you have to write to them and ask them.
Also good about collaboration and teamwork. So working together on identifying a good ePortfolio platform, not just doing it individually, but actually getting a group of yourselves together and identifying what would be the best way of going around that. So that's a very good suggestion. Yes, also you could change your learning plan for the learners to actually adapt what you are trying to do to their learning styles. Yeah. And find a user-friendly platform. The students have an ability to take, you know, to actually engage more easily with their learning. So excellent. And make a tutorial. That's a really good suggestion. Make a tutorial to be able to use the platform. So again, you're guiding your learners through the process so they can see the different accessibility items there. And if one thing isn't working for them, how to navigate to another area that they can actually work more effectively. And again, look for the cost advantage. So you might want to outsource at that point, and that could involve costs. So yes, so you'd have to be quite careful about that. Yeah. Oh, and seek the advice of special education experts and practitioners in deciding what platform to use. Excellent. Yeah, fabulous solution.
I was going to say, that's a great start. We've got lots of extra solutions.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay, so we'll move on to the second scenario, Christine. Okay, so here we have a secondary pre-service teacher. They're in the last semester of the university and they were looking for a teaching job. So they were sending out her ePortfolio via a link in her job applications. So as well as to potential educators who may assist her in securing a full-time position. So this was going out very widely. So while she had taken care to remove the names of the primary schools and children with whom she worked, she kept in photographs and short video clips of her working with children to demonstrate how she'd met the national standards. So whomever has a link can click to find photos and videos of children, which puts the confidentiality and privacy of the child at risk.
Big hint there. Wasn't I kind?
You are. Okay. So here we have so this is the solution that actually, so this was a real scenario, and this is the solution that happened. Because she hadn't asked the parents for consent, the student was compelled by the university to remove the videos and photos where children could be identified. So what are the issues here? What are the ethical challenges that we've got here? Data privacy, perfect, yeah. We all have, each country has the data privacy regulations, haven't they?
Yeah.
So it's very much a breach of that data privacy, although she had actually got permission at the time for her assessment to use these photos and videos. So children are very much considered to be part of a vulnerable sector, you're quite right. So, you know, advertising images of children is not really a good thing to be doing due to their vulnerability.
Yeah, but what you're saying, Christine, is though that the pre-service teacher was using that consent for a different purpose. So she had consent to use these students' photos in remember I said the private audience of assessment, but now putting it out publicly for a job is not the same use, and so therefore not the same consent. Yeah.
So
thanks,
what might
Josephine.
be so what might be yes, a consent from parents is not secured to be used in this process. That's completely right, Josephine. It's when parents do know that pre-service teachers are involved in the classrooms and they have to undertake assessment, so there is an implicit consent there, an implied consent that that things used for assessment are okay. But if you want to use that information more broadly or for a secondary use, as in this case, that's a different consent process. So this is one, seeking consent from parents, the solution could be blurring the photos so the identity can be anonymized. So that could be a solution. So yes. Excellent. So then you can't actually see the children, but you can see the teacher is there, you know, engaging in activity, which again is what the teacher is trying, that pre-service teacher is trying to demonstrate. It's her ability, it's not so much about the children, but about herself. So that could be one way of dealing with that. Any other solutions?
So we might only have time for one more scenario. So, this is an interesting one. A bit long.
Okay, so this scenario is really around a young person being a senior person in the high school, specializing in early industrial design. And they're developing an ePortfolio for part of their capstone project. So while they want their employers to be able to view the work and their ability, they also want to make sure that some of the material is considered reusable and other material is not. And this can be quite a challenge, because if you are actually publishing your work, it then comes out and it's then considered to be in the public domain and anybody can reuse it. So this is actually what the student did. You add an appropriate Creative Commons license to your pages, indicating to anyone who views your portfolio what material can be reused.
So is everyone familiar with Creative Commons? I guess that's a question. So what's the challenge here? Creative Commons is part of the solution. So it's about copyright. Yep. Wow. Great minds think alike, just pinged up at the same time. Copyright.
Exactly. So I think it's important that when we are using, yes, you can actually, you can differentiate this, and one of the solutions there is to differentiate the features. So that's very clear. So you identify what is actually reusable through Creative Commons, and Creative Commons licenses are quite straightforward to use, that you actually allow people to make changes as long as they refer to you. So we have recently done a project on digital literacy between the University of Queensland and the Queen's University in Belfast, and we used the digital literacy resources from the University of Queensland under Creative Commons, but we had to change them because they were being used in the UK. So we actually had to make quite significant changes to them, but we were able to do that. And then as long as we made sure everybody knew that the original creators were the University of Queensland. So it is really quite straightforward to use Creative Commons and a really good way of doing it. But it's important that we do enable our students to understand the importance of copyright when they're using ePortfolios, that they're not using copyright material in their ePortfolios. And I mean, we as educators must also be aware that we are not using copyright images, even in our presentations, without the appropriate reference to them. So we must always, so we can use, again, Creative Commons images, we can use Creative Commons information within our own presentations to our students, but we must also be role modeling good practice around the use of copyright as well. And there's been some really good solutions in the chat there, disclosure for not all information about the design, or just take some of the design when the information will be published. So that's really important. And also specify which requires attribution and which doesn't. So again, being very specific, what is copyright and what's not, and also acknowledgement and citation. So we have to really be ensure that our students are aware how you acknowledge and how you cite. And that's really, really important. So that's great. Christine, we might just go to the very final one about the children and the consent with parents, because I think that sort of...
That's it.
Yeah, so this scenario is something that I've just recently been involved in, and it does talk a little bit to our pre-service teacher education scenario. That I had some university students that were engaged in a project working with primary school children, and to be involved in the project, the children have to give their assent. So they had to sign a form that said that they were happy to be involved in the project. And then the parents provided consent for the children to be involved, but we also wanted to be able to use their information for conference presentation and publications. So again, this would be de-identified data, it wouldn't be images. And we wouldn't be saying who the schools were or where the children came from. And so the parents did provide the consent for this. However, we then decided to invite the children up to the university. And so, of course, we wanted to be able to take some photos of them and also potentially ask them their thoughts on the project. So what we had to do then in order to do that was we had to ask both the parents and the children to sign a marketing release form, allowing the team to use audio-visual images of the children. And we had to also identify that social media was going to be a potential outlet. So we gave a very clear indication to the parents just how that information was going to be used, so they could consent or not, to those images being stored. So I think it's really important when we're engaged in ePortfolio use, or if we've got students coming into our classrooms, that we make sure they are following the right process to gain, in terms of if it's going to go beyond their assessment. So this was something that the students were doing extracurricular, and no doubt they will come to us and they will ask us if they can use this information, potentially in their ePortfolios. So because we had the marketing release forms, there is that potential then that they'll be able to reuse the data for this purpose. So I just wanted to sign off to sort of square off that. So, and there are some excellent solutions coming up here. Oh yeah, share the output first before releasing it publicly. That's a really good solution here. So not only just go off and do it, but also show people the images and the audio, share that with the participants before we actually do the publication. That's a really good solution. And also it's important to explicitly express how something will be used and to what extent. And I think that's very, very clear. And definitely from an ethical perspective, we must always be very open and honest with those that are involved in our work. So that's absolutely excellent.
Yes, well done, everybody. That was, yeah, very rich. All right, well, I think there was one more scenario, but that's fine. You can look at that later. we're really now up to, there's a little bit more information around before the classroom use, but you can look at that later too, a couple more resources. But we'd very much like to take any questions if people have some now for the last few minutes. So while you're thinking about that, do we have any, Nan?
Yes, earlier, like, yes.
Yes,
Slade asked how we can maintain ethical STS. I think he means standards.
how to maintain ethical standards.
Yes.
As in academic integrity.
Oh, he asked long times ago. It's from the first part.
We might need some help here.
Yes. Lei, can you elaborate your question a little bit more? We check Leno, is he still here? Because he has a problem with internet.
Oh. Well, if it has to do with academic integrity, there's a lot of work going into maintaining standards. It basically involves the whole of the cycle of academic integrity. So from prevention, education, investigation, right through to, I guess, prosecuting cases. There's work that needs to be done across all of those. And I'm happy to talk about that at another time, but it's a lot of it's around communicating with the students, what is expected of them and what will happen to them if they, I think some of them, there's lots of reasons why students cheat, lots of research around that, but they need to understand that we have sophisticated tools as well as they have sophisticated opportunities, and it is quite possible they will get caught. And if that's the case, what that means for them, I don't think we're often clear enough about what that could be. So yeah, a lot of it's around communication with students.
I'm just in the process of working on a digital game for academic integrity for students. Now we're aiming this obviously at the higher education end, but obviously if anyone's interested in that, do let me know. We'll be basing it around very general standards of what is expected and going through some of the issues that you talked about earlier in the annotation slide around privacy, confidentiality, plagiarism, copying, cutting and pasting. All of those things will be part of the game. So if anyone's interested in that, do let Nan know, and obviously we can have a conversation about that later.
Yeah, so it's communication and education really are the two most important prongs. Any other questions now?
I think Mel asked about the sign language.
Yes, I was interested in that too. Did we get an answer? Is that possible in Zoom?
Yes, Mel asked, may I ask if sign language features of this webinar series on ePhoto be included?
I know you can actually put on something at the bottom that's voice interpretation of what's being said. Maybe that's what Mel means.
Well, can you?
I don't know.
I see him as, I think, yes.
Yes, I just would like to inform the body that there are some people who are interested in doing their portfolio, but they belong to some in the cluster or sector with disabilities.
Yep.
So how can we promote ePortfolios with this group of people who are also educable, but they would rather have some e-language interpreter side by side while the speakers are delivering their speeches? I think that is one handicapness of Zoom and online learning, when we cannot cater to the needs of these people with difficulties in terms of because here in the Philippines we have masses or Catholic masses with captions or sign language also being given simultaneously, and even during the presidential campaign of Biden, he was able to provide some insertions of sign language for the people.
Yeah,
I hope
that'd be
I hope that
great.
could be one of the issues that can be handled by the educational sectors, so that it can improve the delivery of knowledge transfers and knowledge acquisitions for less people with difficulties.
Yeah.
I'm just concerned about it.
Oh yeah, totally. I totally agree with you. And I think it's very difficult. We have to just talk to the commercial providers, don't we? We've got the money to, like Zoom and Microsoft, to develop something for sign language in particular. I'm not aware of that. I know you can have captions and other software. Do you know of anything for sign language, Christine?
No, but I mean, I think what Mel is saying is that you could actually take parts of this and create either captions or sign language at a later date. I'm thinking, Mel, that would be probably more effective if we actually set up a session for people with a range of different difficulties in terms of ePortfolio, and to look at that maybe specifically, so that it could be much more inclusive. I agree. But I think it would be, maybe we need to be thinking about that maybe at a later date, about how we might be able to develop some resources that would be much more inclusive. No, I agree completely. Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. Well, while we just to close, I was just going to mention to you, so there's a few resources. So this was the eProfessionalism resource that Christine was talking about for digital essentials, the ones that University of Queensland have under Creative Commons. There's a whole range of these called digital essentials on different topics. I've just shown you eProfessionalism, but they're quite free for you to use. So that's a very well, it's a very good tool to have, that you can just take, for this one, for example, has all these topics. So you could use that to prepare, or to actually use with your students as well. This is the one, another one I think I mentioned last time, but it's by in a North American group, and Nan's got the link, but these are all the different parts of digital ethics this one talks about, and it's online, and you can click on these and go to different ones. So that's another free resource that may be of use for probably older students, but also for your own understanding about what some of the questions are. And these are the topics, the papers that I've given to Nan to put up on your community of practice site. So you can just, they've got the link. So these are the things that Christine and I have been involved with in the Australian ePortfolio Forum and in some other places. And that's the links to the two resources I just showed you. So I think that's probably, I'll stop sharing now, and it's time's probably up, I would say, unless there's something we can fit in quickly.
Yes, I just put in the attendance link as well as the survey. Can you please do that? And then I already upload the resources link to the website of this webinar page. So you can go and take a look, and then the recordings will be uploaded later on that website, the same page, as well as like for the PowerPoint, for the first one, now we have the problem because we just have flooding last week. So now we couldn't put everything together just yet. But
yes,
once it's ready,
Shari's onto it. She talked to me today. She's getting onto it. Yeah, we were delayed by the floods. Sorry.
Yes, and yes, before we close, I would like to add one thing is the ethical considerations is also dealing with culture. For example, like when I study in America and in Australia, I just mentioned that one school in northeastern of Thailand. But when I went back to Thailand, people want me to put the name of the school, the year of the student, and very specific, something like that. So it's kind of different as well. So it's like what I would like to say is very complicated topics, and today is very, very insightful. And then I really like the analysis. Maybe can be used in our community, the scenarios that we can use to discuss later. I mean, some of them are still the one that we have not discussed, maybe can we use that in the website, on the website, so we can facilitate the discussion further.
Of course, yes.
Yes.
Yes, you're more than welcome to do that, Nan. And we don't underestimate the complexity of digital ethics across cultural contexts. I mean, I worked in Singapore for a couple of years, and the way that the students there were used to using social media was very different to my experience elsewhere. And I guess in those contexts, it is the difference between your online presence in your personal life and your professional life then becomes even further blurred. So it is around how you work with students to understand the importance, I guess, of privacy and confidentiality of vulnerable people, as opposed to their friends who they're going out for dinner with, who don't mind being, their images being put up. But I think we were in our breakout room, we were talking about the importance of maybe really teaching young children these important understandings about being digital citizens from a very young age, so that then by the time they get to tertiary education, it becomes a little bit more second nature to them. So I think there's quite a bit of work to do really across the education continuum, but we don't underestimate the complexity of it. But we'd be happy to come back at any point and support you in further conversations.
Yeah. So I think the next one will be Shari and I in a couple of weeks. We'll be talking about using authentic assessment in ePortfolios. So I hope you can join us then. And then Christine and I'll be back after that. Maybe Shari too, if I can get her to come. It's night time for us, so we'll see. But yes, it's been great being with you again and having, as someone said there, lively discussion. Really good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all very much. It's been lovely meeting you all, and we'll see you soon.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kun Piyapa, and thank you, Christine.
Bye.
Bye bye. Bye everyone.